Thank you. Very good to have you here. Our subject today is the new risk landscape, and I'm delighted to have two, I might describe you as veteran geographers to guide us through this landscape. David Petraeus and Nabil Fahmy. I'm going to give you no introductions because people know who you are. Our idea was we're going to begin with the Middle East and then bring in some other things and eventually end up in Ukraine because David has just been there. But let's start, perhaps predictably, with Donald Trump's visit. David, let's begin with you. What do you think? Do you think anything changed because of that visit? And how do you see the Middle East at the moment? And I'll come on to you now.
Yeah, no, I thought this was a very important visit. Mohim Jiddan Jiddan in Arabic, in fact. And it wasn't just the business deals and the enhanced commercial interests and so forth that all took place there. It was also some very serious geopolitical events. The meeting with al-Shara was very significant. Lifting the sanctions on Syria is, again, equally significant. And the discussions at a very timely moment about Iran and the U.S. effort, of course, to try to broker a nuclear deal, but the threat in the background, if that's not successful, that the U.S. has an enormous amount of military power out here right now, if needed. And then other geopolitical topics here as well. So it just wasn't all business all the time by any means. That was what took the headlines. I think there were very significant conversations on other issues involving the Middle East at really quite a pivotal moment, with Iran at a real low in decades, I would argue. Hezbollah has been shattered. Hamas obviously dramatically degraded. The Houthis have been hit very hard. And Iran itself, with its economy really doing very poorly. And then this damage to its very sophisticated Russian S-300 air and ballistic missile defense system by the second Israeli response to the Iranian fire on their own territory. So again, I think this is a very interesting moment here in the region, and I think that a lot of the topics that were discussed are pertaining to that.
Let's just unpack them. Maybe we can look at Syria first. Maybe you go on Syria and ask Nabil. That deal, did you see that coming? And what is the consequence of that? Does that really... Do you think the region is now fully behind Syria? There are question marks, for instance.
I think, by and large, that's the case. There is a hope that this individual, who has obviously had a bit of a checkered past, I should note he was in detention in Iraq when I was commanding the surge.
I think you may have arrested him.
He then was released. He went with ISIS, then Al-Qaeda, then force war, all of those. But, you know, the question is, can he achieve a government that represents all of the people of Syria and doesn't only provide majority rule, but also minority rights being assured as well, bringing together all of these different ethnic, sectarian, even political groupings, and let's give him the best chance that he can have. Let's hope that he can rise to be the leader that could do what I've just said, and let's give him every opportunity so the U.S. lifts the sanctions. Other countries out here have been providing financial assistance, dealing with some of their debts, et cetera. I think that's a very significant development in the region because obviously it prevents Iran from transiting Syrian soil down into southern Lebanon to help reconstitute Hezbollah, whose leadership has been decimated and his combat power has been dramatically reduced.
Nabil, Syria, do you think that what happened in terms of Syria being brought into the fold, do you think in some ways that also shows the power of what's happened in the Gulf? You know, these were Gulf countries who persuaded Trump to do this.
I think it was very important, but it's the beginning of the story, not the end of the story. Syria, for the first time, came to the Arab Summit in Saudi Arabia first, and now attending a summit with Trump. At the same time, they were asked to do a number of things, but the incentive was put up front. In other words, we will reduce or remove sanctions, and we will provide assistance. That being said, all of those who met the Syrians, be them the Arabs or the Americans, though I'm speaking more on the Arab side, want a better Syria. They don't want an extremist Syria. They don't want, frankly, a revisionist Syria either. So the incentives out there, but there has to be something to be delivered in response by the Syrians, which is what David just said. It has to be for all the Syrians.
Do you trust the new leadership in Syria?
Trust is a very strong word.
Yes.
But I'm ready to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Because there's no other way to move this forward, and it serves the interests of Arabs and non-Arabs to solve this in a positive sense. So I would invest in it. The word of trust needs a couple of more.
Are you convinced that, I suppose, Turkey, Israel, these people who have had different interests in Syria, let's put it that way, that they are behind this push?
No, I don't. I definitely don't believe the Israelis are behind this at all. I do believe the Turks are favorable about this, and that's why they actually were part of the discussion with the Shah when he was in Saudi. The Israelis, after the change in regime, not only occupied more territory in the Golan, went even beyond the Golan, and have attacked airports in Syria since then, although there have been talks between the Syrians and the Israelis. So the Israelis are not yet there, and Israeli posture in the region as a whole is highly problematic.
We can come back to Israel in 1 second, but David also mentioned Iran. David, do you want to just take that forward? Now that Syria has been brought into the fold, do you think there is a chance of Iran also being brought back into the fold?
That's probably a bit over-optimistic, but there's a chance that there could be a nuclear deal that doesn't have some of the shortcomings of the previous nuclear deal that could enable the lifting of sanctions progressively and so forth as confidence is built, and that could lead to them being a more constructive player in the region than they certainly have been for many decades. Noting all the damage that has been done by their proxies in this region and still being done by the Houthis, who have still not resolved the issues there. So I think it's an opportunity that all are working as hard as they can to achieve. You can see the narrowing of the differences between the U.S. position and the Iranian position. No enrichment whatsoever is the U.S. opening. Maybe that ends up being for 3 years, and then you have an opportunity to do something smaller. Again, but you can actually see this deal starting to come together. And assuming Iran then also stops some of the terrible activities that they're doing through proxies in the region, which have been so destabilizing, then you can start to see the contours of something that could be much more positive. Do you think, I'll come to Nabil again in a second, but do you think that regime change is now slightly off the table with Iran? I remember years ago, Rumsfeld always making the point that you had two contradictory aims in Iran. One was regime change, and the other was trying to stop them getting the bomb. And the more you tried to stop them getting the bomb, the more that the population rallied to the regime. You know, a CIA director learns really quickly that you have to deal with the world the way it is, not the way you'd like it to be. And I never thought that regime change was at all realistic, frankly. Very interesting. Nabil?
I think it's important to take into account what's been happening years before the visit and immediately before the visit. The Arab Gulf states have actually opened up with Iran, not in a naive sense, but in terms of, we'll talk to you, but there are requirements. This Trump visit, everybody's focusing on the numbers that Trump signed off getting. I'd actually look a bit more deeply. A lot of this is enhanced Arab Gulf capacity building, be that technology, AI, not only there are American companies, but it's actually a lot of it is here. Thirdly, the arms sales. This is all meant to be a response to the Arab Gulf and Arab world desire to be able to deal with most of its problems alone in competition with its neighbors. We understand the world is different. It's not bipolar, and it's a unique unipolar, which isn't defined even by the pole itself. Yes. So we need to do more ourselves. Therefore, when the Saudis negotiated with Iran in China, which started in Iraq, by the way,
Yes.
it's an indication that we're taking things on. So I think the Iran issue is moving in the right direction, but it's not there yet. We need to do more. And to do more, we need to deal with many of the other issues in the region. I'm happy that Trump reached a ceasefire with the Houthis. I'm happy that they negotiated with Hamas to get the American hostage out. Happy that they met the Syrians, of course. But Gaza, Palestine, Gaza, Palestine, Gaza, Palestine, if you don't deal with that, you're going to have many more asymmetrical conflicts in the region than we have now, because we're allowing the rule of force to proceed and prevail over the force of law.
David.
Just a really quick one to highlight something the minister just said. You know, these business deals, the headlines were Boeing, big military. This is technology out here. Again, I'm just become chairman of KKR Middle East. We want to invest in this technology. It's not the traditional fossil fuels only or petrochemicals or the rest of that. There's a huge other economy that's developing out here in states that are promoting innovation, data centers, AI, and all that goes along with that in a very significant way. And the ability to sell the most advanced chips here is one that is also very important.
But this all has geopolitical consequences, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because you now have the Gulf. I mean, Nabil, even when you were foreign minister of Egypt, Egypt might have seemed a more powerful thing than it does nowadays. The Gulf is such a suction of power and money, and as David just pointed out, technology at the moment. Just very quickly, within the Arab world, what are the consequences of that? That basically you have ever more power in the Gulf and slightly less in other parts of the Arab region?
It's not a balance of power if everybody's doing badly.
Yes.
There's no use of that. Frankly, I have no problem whatsoever with many more countries doing better and investing their capacity towards the better good. We all benefit from that. It's a new Arab world. It's different, but there's much more in common among Arabs than there is differences. Therefore, I want to see more success. I have no hesitation whatsoever in applauding anybody who succeeds, provided that we understand that we are all medium-sized countries. So, and at the end of the day, rule of law has to prevail over the rule of force. Otherwise, we will be at a detrimental situation in the long term.
One thing that Nabil mentioned earlier was the word China, because you could argue the other big thing that has changed in this region is China is showing a slightly greater role. It played a role in Saudi Arabia and Iran. David, from an American perspective, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, there's a bit of a cautionary view of that, needless to say, but let's keep in mind why that happened. It's because the U.S. is now a net exporter in both oil and natural gas. Yes, we have to import some heavy crude for our refineries because we make too much light crude. That's a seismic change, and that's a result of the energy revolution that has been most profound in the United States. We don't need the Gulf oil the way that we used to, the way we were dependent on it, say, in the Yom Kippur War aftermath and the Arab oil embargo and all the rest of this. That doesn't exist, that opportunity. It's understandable, therefore, that there is a focus more on the East. It's also South Asia, of course. It's India, another huge customer for that. So on the one hand, this is natural, it's normal, it's understandable. But yeah, there's a concern about China's influence creeping into other areas as well.
Come on to Israel and Gaza now. If you heard this morning, I think the UK, France, and Canada all basically said to Israel, if you do more than you're doing at the moment in Gaza, we're going to sanction you. And that is an escalation from the West. I mean, Nabil, first, do you think that will have any effect?
I think it will, and I think it's not enough. Despite the successful visit that Trump had in the Arab Gulf, and again, it was a success. Every day since then, Israelis have killed 100 Palestinians at least. They actually started bombing while Trump was here. That's a message to the Americans as much as it is to the rest of the Arab world. But as an Arab, when we hear that, when we see that, ultimately, our anger increases even though we want to build. My country was the first to have a peace agreement with Israel. We want to build the Middle East, not destroy it. But it cannot be by one country being in complete violation of international law of any consequence. And let me add here, frankly, the successful visit here has raised the threshold by which Trump himself will be assessed in the Middle East. Because you succeeded in doing all of this, now are you going to deliver on the politics? I mean, the real amusing part of this visit, superficially, I look at it much more deeply. Superficially, people see the superpower looking for material gain and the regional powers looking for political gain. Yes. Now, it's more than that. But in essence, America has to deliver on not our interests, but on international order and law. And we are losing our morality, not only in the region, but globally. You cannot come and ask us to take positions based on law or morality elsewhere if you ignore it in our own region.
To be fair to Trump, I think he's a very transactional president who doesn't tend to focus as much on morality as previous ones. But David, I wanted to ask you, do you think that something has changed in the American-Israel axis? There has been, some people, very obviously Trump did not go to Israel this time. There is now this sign of other Western powers putting pressure on Israel about Gaza. Do you think something has changed at all?
It's hard to say. There may be something that has changed a bit. The challenge that I've always seen, and again as a former military commander who conducted a comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaign in Iraq and somewhat similar in Afghanistan, has been that the strategy that Israel has pursued has not actually achieved their three stated objectives: destroy Hamas, prevent Hamas from governing again, and get the hostages back. Each of those has been only partially achieved. But moreover, that there should be a fourth objective that their military should be trying to achieve as well, which is to provide a better future for the Palestinian people in Gaza without Hamas in their lives. In essence, this is what we set out to do in major urban areas of Iraq that al-Qaeda had taken over. And by the way, Hamas is an Islamist extremist organization. It is not reconcilable by and large. And that was how al-Qaeda was viewed in Iraq. You go into Fallujah, Ramadi, Bakuba. We told the people in advance, we want to make your lives better by getting al-Qaeda out of your neighborhoods, out of your lives, and we will then stay and provide security for you with population control measures, biometric ID cards, and rebuilding and restoration of basic services and so forth. And I just don't see that approach here. Clear and leave the way they've been doing, or just pushing populations all over. Hamas is still roughly the same strength they were at the beginning. They're not capable companies, battalions, brigades the way they were. Now they're insurgents. They're guerrillas. And the kind of campaign that is being pursued is not a counterinsurgency. It's more of a counterterrorism where you go in and kill a bunch of bad guys and then leave.
Do you think
so that's difficult, and that's why they haven't destroyed Hamas yet. They've degraded them considerably, but they can't destroy them with that strategy. It's why they haven't kept Hamas from being the guys with the most guns, which gives you governance to the degree that there is any in Gaza. And of course, the final hostages, there will be really tough conditions for Israel to accept, some of which I don't think they should accept, such as ever leaving the control of the border between southern Gaza and Egypt, under which, in tunnels, and through which, and the Rafah crossing, so much of the materiel and so forth that allowed Hamas to create this incredible subterranean architecture and capability.
Do you think the underlying problem is because that has been a Netanyahu strategy rather than an Israeli military strategy of the people you know well?
I do believe that, and I had long conversations with Yoav Gallant, and I think one of the principal reasons he was probably replaced is that he kept asking, what is the political end state that we're trying to seek? What will it look like? What do you want it to look like? And he's never got an answer, nor have we.
Can I jump in,
very
John,
quickly, and then we'll jump to Ukraine.
Sure. This is not, we're in military operations, but the objective is political.
Yes.
The Israelis do not want to withdraw from Gaza under any circumstances. They do not want to withdraw from the West Bank under any circumstance. No matter how efficient your military can be, and I, of course, cannot at all challenge what the general is saying militarily, there will be resistance to occupation. So what really is required here, there has to be a clear, concrete commitment to ending the conflict and how, and we can negotiate the steps to get there. But unless we're, Ayalon, the former head of Shin Bet, was on television recently, and he was asked, what's your response to October 7th? He said, I condemn Hamas, and my response is a two-state solution. And he was asked, are you rewarding Hamas? He said, no, I'm securing Israel. We don't trust each other, and they want a state, and we want a state. We need to resolve not only the crisis, but the conflict.
If you have a political end state, if you understand, let's say it's Hamas or Gaza without Hamas in it, governed by Palestinians, for Palestinians, securing themselves, all done progressively, to be sure. This isn't going to happen overnight by any means, and Hamas is going to resist mightily. But if you had that end state, his military could tell him how you achieve it. Those who have experience with civil military counterinsurgency campaigns could tell him how to succeed it, noting that this is probably vastly more difficult than anything, than all of what we did in Iraq put together. The challenges here are staggering. This is the most fiendishly difficult military problem imaginable, but it is not impossible.
On the subject of fiendishly difficult military problems, just one quick last diversion, because there is another hot war on this continent. Ukraine, David, I think you've been there 6 times since 2022. You just come back. Trump this morning basically said, it's a European problem. Let them sort it out. What's your view?
Well, I don't see President Putin in any way eager to stop fighting. What we should have done long ago was provide so much more assistance to Ukraine that they could have changed the dynamics on the battlefield to make Putin realize that he cannot achieve further gains at acceptable costs, and noting that what's acceptable to him in costs is absolutely staggering. The estimates approach now 1 million killed and wounded Russians over the course of the last several years. And I just don't see him willing to negotiate seriously. His demands are essentially regime change, demilitarization, and become part of the Russian sphere of influence, all 3 of which are totally unacceptable, not just to President Zelensky, not just to the Ukrainian people, but also to Europeans very much, and I think should be for us as well. You cannot reward this kind of brutal, barbaric, unprovoked, naked aggression.
Do you think the Ukrainians, there seems to be some evidence recently that they are doing better on the battlefield? Do you think
I saw what I saw. They're producing 3.5 million drones this year themselves. This is a country that is producing tomorrow's technology for today's wars and employing it incredibly impressively. We struggle to produce sort of today's technology for tomorrow's wars. So what they're doing is truly, it's just absolutely unprecedented and exceptional. How does a nation that has no navy sink 1/3 of the Russian Black Sea Fleet? Aerial drones that find the ships, maritime drones that sink them. They're making the Russians pay for every inch of additional territory that they take. I asked the commanding general of their forces 2 weeks ago, how many drones did you employ on the previous day? He said 6,000. Think about that. They don't have manpower. They're heavily outnumbered. They're heavily outgunned, although, boy, their heavy artillery rounds are plentiful this year. The U.S. pipeline is full for another 4 to 6 months. Europeans are very much coming online, and the progress by the Ukrainians in this unmanned warfare that is the future of conflict has been breathtaking.
So in a circumstance where they do not get peace and they have to hold out throughout the summer, you are reasonably confident they would manage to do that?
Yes, I think they can. They certainly will try to do that, and I think that the likelihood is that they could indeed do that.
How do you talked about America's image around the world and stuff, and the West's image. Nabil, just to finish on this, when you look at Ukraine, what do you feel about that from this region?
My position personally, and I know many in the region, any occupation of territory by force is a violation of international law. There's no exceptions to that. And I've said that, by the way, to the Russians, myself in Moscow. That being said, the world order was established on two parameters, post-World War II: balance of power, East-West, and spheres of influence that neither side went too far into violating. The balance of power broke, the spheres of influence were therefore violated. Putin told me in 2014 personally, I've been treated in undignified fashion and I will react. He did not say he's going to war. This was February 2014. So I have no problem whatsoever standing up anywhere against use of force. But ultimately, we need to also develop a system in order today, and I think the West missed the opportunity, frankly, because it was so dominant, where it's about a balance of interests, not about a balance of power. Balance of power shift. And today the West is really looking for who are we together or not, and what do we actually want to do? That's even more important than the relations with the East, or if you want, the previously non-aligned states and so on.
And one very last thing then to David, with the West in an identity crisis, do you buy that?
No, I think there were some rocky moments, certainly. What's really interesting is to see how the Europeans are stepping up. Kudos to President Trump for doing something no previous president has been able to do, even though every one of them was frustrated that Europeans were not doing enough to provide for their own security on their own continent. He certainly has galvanized that. His words have been a catalyst for them, and it's very interesting to see how they're responding. And oh, by the way, anybody who thinks that the Article 5 collective self-defense component of NATO is threatened by what's going on should just remember that there are U.S. forces in the countries that are contiguous to, share borders with Russia, and I think that's the most powerful deterrent of all. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, sizable U.S. forces deployed there, and they'll stay deployed there.